3 weeks into his stay in Cedar Falls, David had fallen into a routine that felt foreign yet comforting. Wake up with the sunrise, coffee by the window overlooking the mountains, then work on his laptop until the internet signal gave out around noon. The afternoons belonged to long walks through the forest. Breathing air so clean it made his lungs ache in the best possible way, his daily trips to Mountain View Diner had become as regular as clockwork. Rosa always greeted him with the same warm smile, remembering exactly how he liked his coffee without having to ask. Black, no sugar, hot enough to wake the dead. She'd learned he was some kind of computer person, though he'd been vague about the details. The truth was, he wasn't sure he wanted to be that person anymore. It was during these daily visits that David began noticing things. Small details that painted a picture of Rosa's life beyond the cheerful server who remembered everyone's usual order, like how she always counted her tips twice before putting them in her apron pocket, how she picked up extra shifts whenever someone called in sick, even when exhaustion showed in the slight tremor of her hands, how she saved the day-old pastries in a paper bag instead of throwing them away. One Tuesday morning, Rosa's daughter Lily came into the diner after school, backpack slung over her shoulder and mud on her sneakers. She slid into the corner booth and pulled out homework while her mother finished the lunch rush. David watched as Rosa brought her daughter a glass of milk and half a sandwich, ruffling her hair before returning to work. "Mom works really hard," Lily announced to David when Rosa stepped into the kitchen. The 8-year-old had apparently decided he was safe to talk to, despite her mother's subtle warnings about stranger danger. "I can see that," David replied, closing his laptop to give her his full attention. "What's your favorite subject in school?" "Art," Lily said immediately, pulling out a drawing of what looked like a house surrounded by flowers. "But we don't have art class anymore. They cut it because of money problems. Mom says maybe next year, but she always says maybe next year." The conversation was interrupted when Rosa returned, shooting her daughter a look that said she'd been listening. "Lily, don't bother the customers with school gossip." "It's not gossip, Mom. It's true. Mrs. Henderson told everyone that if we don't get more funding, they might have to close the after-school program too." David saw something flicker across Rosa's face before she quickly masked it with her professional smile. "Why don't you finish your homework so we can go home before dark?" That evening, David found himself walking through the older part of town, drawn by curiosity about the community center Lily had mentioned. The building sat on a corner lot, a tired-looking brick structure that might have been impressive in the 1960s, paint peeled from the window frames, and several tiles were missing from the front steps. A hand-painted sign read, "Cedar Falls Community Center, all welcome." Through the windows he could see Rosa moving around inside, setting up chairs in what looked like a meeting room. She wasn't alone. A handful of other adults were helping, including Bill from the garage and an elderly woman David recognized from the diner. They worked with the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. The next day, David's curiosity got the better of him. "Mind if I ask what goes on at the community center?" he said as Rosa refilled his coffee cup. She paused, studying his face as if trying to determine whether his interest was genuine. "After-school program mostly. Kids come there when parents are still working. We help with homework, provide snacks, sometimes do crafts or games. Nothing fancy, but it keeps them safe and off the streets." "Sounds important." "It is." Rosa's voice carried a weight that suggested personal investment beyond professional duty. "Lily's been going there since she was 5? So have most of the kids in town. Their parents work late shifts or multiple jobs. Without the program... She trailed off, not wanting to voice what might happen. David learned more over the following days, pieces of information gathered from overheard conversations and careful questions. The community center was struggling financially, running on a shoestring budget that seemed to shrink every year. The building needed repairs that the town couldn't afford. The heating system was so old that volunteers brought space heaters from home during winter months. Rosa volunteered there every day after her diner shift ended, coordinating activities and helping kids with homework. She never talked about being tired, but David noticed how she rubbed her temples when she thought no one was looking. How she sometimes forgot to eat lunch during busy days. How her uniform had been carefully mended in several places rather than replaced, one afternoon. David decided to see the center in action. He walked over during what he assumed was program time and peered through the windows. Inside, about 15 children of various ages sat around mismatched tables. Some worked on homework while others played quiet games with donated toys that had seen better days. Rosa moved between groups, helping a boy with math problems here, settling a small dispute there. The building's problems were obvious even from outside. Water stains on the ceiling suggested roof leaks. The windows were single-pane glass that probably did little to keep out winter cold. The playground equipment behind the building looked like it belonged in a museum of playground hazards. Bill appeared beside him, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. Sad sight, isn't it? The building, the whole situation. That place has been limping along for years. Rosa puts in more hours there than she does at the diner, and she doesn't get paid a penny for it. None of the volunteers do. It's all heart and determination keeping those doors open. David watched through the window as Rosa knelt beside a little girl who was crying over a torn drawing. She helped tape the paper back together, turning the tear into part of the artwork. The girl's face lit up with joy at this small miracle. "Why doesn't the town do more to help?" David asked. Dill shrugged. "What more can they do? This isn't exactly a wealthy community. Most folks are barely getting by themselves. The town council allocated what they could, but it's not nearly enough. They've been talking about closing the center for 2 years now, trying to find alternatives that don't exist." That evening, David sat in his cabin researching the community center online. The official website hadn't been updated in 3 years. The last town council meeting minutes mentioned the center's funding crisis in depressing detail. Without significant repairs and ongoing support, the building would be condemned within 6 months, he thought about Lily's disappointed face when she talked about losing art class, about Rosa's exhausted smile as she worked her second unpaid job, about 15 kids who would have nowhere safe to go after school if the center closed. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Falls, David felt something stirring inside him. That wasn't related to running away from his problems. It was the unfamiliar sensation of wanting to run toward something instead. The question was whether he had the courage to act on it. Outside his window, the first autumn leaves were beginning to fall, painting the mountainside in shades of gold and red. Winter would come soon, and with it the heating bills that might finally break the community center's already strained budget. David closed his laptop and stared at the mountains, thinking about problems that money could solve and wondering if solving them might help heal something broken inside himself. The first snow came early that year, arriving in October like an uninvited guest who decided to stay. David woke to find his cabin surrounded by a white blanket that made everything look clean and new. The solar panels on his roof were covered, but he had enough battery power stored to last the day. As he sipped his morning coffee, he couldn't help but think about the community center's ancient heating system, and how it would handle this unexpected cold snap. His concern proved justified. When he arrived at the diner for breakfast, Rosa looked more tired than usual, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She moved slower between tables, as if carrying invisible weight on her shoulders. "Everything okay?" David asked when she brought his coffee. Rosa hesitated, then sat down across from him. The morning rush was over, and only 2 other customers remained in the diner. "The heating broke at the center yesterday, completely dead. Repair guy says the whole system needs to be replaced." "How much would that cost?" "More than we have, more than we'll ever have." She rubbed her temples with her fingertips. "I had to send the kids home early yesterday. Can't have them sitting in a freezing building, and we can't afford space heaters for a room that size." David watched her struggle with emotions she was trying to keep private. "What will happen to the program?" "I don't know. The town council is meeting tonight to discuss options, but what options are there?" We've been borrowing from next year's budget to keep the lights on this year. There's no money for a new heating system. Through the window, David could see children walking to school, bundled up in coats and scarves. Some of those same kids would normally go to the community center after school. Now they'd have nowhere to go while their parents finished work shifts. That afternoon, David drove to the center to see the situation for himself. Rosa was there with two other volunteers, trying to set up space heaters they'd borrowed from around town. The effort was clearly hopeless. The building was too large, too poorly insulated, and the heaters were too small. Everyone's breath was visible in the cold air. "This isn't going to work," said the elderly volunteer David recognized from the diner. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, and she'd been helping at the center for over a decade. "We're just fooling ourselves." Rosa refused to give up. "Maybe if we close off the back rooms and just heat the main area, Honey," Mrs. Patterson said gently, "even if these heaters could warm one room, we can't afford the electric bill they'd create. Sometimes you have to face facts." David watched Rosa's shoulders sag in defeat. All her determination and hard work weren't enough to fight physics and poverty. The center would close, the kids would suffer, and there was nothing she could do about it. That evening, David sat in his warm cabin and thought about money. For 20 years, he'd made more than he could spend, investing wisely and living carefully. The divorce had taken half his assets, but half of the substantial fortune was still more money than most people saw in a lifetime. He'd been sitting on these resources, nursing his wounds and feeling sorry for himself, while 15 children faced a winter without a safe place to go after school. The next morning, David made some phone calls. His contractor friend Jake in Los Angeles owed him a favor from a project they'd worked on together. Jake knew people, and people knew people, and by noon David had connected with a heating and cooling company based in the next town over. "You want to install a complete HVA system anonymously?" The company owner, a woman named Carol, sounded skeptical. "Why anonymous?" "Personal reasons. The job needs to be done right, but I don't want anyone knowing who paid for it." "Can you handle that?" "We can handle anything if the check clears. But this kind of system for a building that size... We're talking serious money." "How serious?" When Carol gave him the estimate, David didn't hesitate. "When can you start?" 3 days later, a truck pulled up to the community center. Rosa was inside with Mrs. Patterson, trying to organize activities that didn't require heating when workers began unloading equipment. She rushed outside, confused and worried. "Excuse me, but what are you doing?" Rosa asked the crew chief. "Installing your new heating system, ma'am. Should have you nice and warm by tomorrow evening. There must be some mistake. We didn't order any heating system. We can't afford ... The crew chief consulted his paperwork. "Says here the job's been paid for in full. Anonymous benefactor. We're just supposed to install it and make sure everything works properly." Rosa stared at the expensive equipment being wheeled into her building. "Who would do something like this?" "Ma'am, I just install the systems." "But whoever it was, they care about this place. They specified the best equipment we carry. This system will keep your building comfortable for the next 20 years." Word spread through town faster than gossip usually traveled. By the time David arrived at the diner for his usual lunch, everyone was talking about the mysterious gift to the community center. Rosa looked overwhelmed, happy, and confused at the same time. "Can you believe it?" she said, setting down his coffee with shaking hands. "Someone just paid for a brand new heating system. Anonymous. Who does something like that?" David stirred his coffee slowly, avoiding her eyes. "Maybe someone who believes in what you're doing. But who? And why? I keep thinking there must be a catch, you know? People don't just give away that kind of money for nothing." Mrs. Patterson, sitting at the counter, shook her head in wonder. "In my 78 years, I've never seen anything like it. That system they're installing costs more than most people make in a year." The installation took 2 days. David found excuses to drive past the center several times, watching the workers transform the building's infrastructure. Professional installation, quality equipment, everything done exactly right. When they finished, the center would be warmer and more comfortable than it had ever been. On the evening of the second day, Rosa called a meeting for all the volunteers and parents. David could see cars gathering in the parking lot as he passed by on his way home. Through the windows, he watched Rosa addressing the small crowd, her face bright with joy and relief. The next morning at the diner, Rosa could barely contain her excitement. The system works perfectly. The whole building is warm and comfortable. The kids can come back tomorrow. She paused, studying David's face. I keep wondering who would do something like this. Someone who understands how important the center is to our community. Maybe they just wanted to help, David said quietly. But why stay anonymous? If I knew who it was, I'd want to thank them properly. This person saved our program. They saved those kids from having nowhere to go. David met her eyes for the first time that morning. Something passed between them, an understanding that neither was ready to speak aloud. Rosa's expression shifted from puzzlement to dawning recognition. David, she said slowly, you did and single quotes ... The important thing is that the kids have somewhere warm to spend their afternoons, he said, leaving money on the table and standing to leave. Rosa caught his arm gently. Why? David looked at this woman who worked 2 jobs to support her daughter, who volunteered countless hours to help other people's children, who never complained despite carrying burdens that would crush most people. Because some things are more important than money. That afternoon, the community center reopened with 15 children running through its warm halls, their laughter echoing off walls that no longer felt like a tomb of broken dreams. The heating system had been running for 3 weeks when David found himself at the community center more often than his own cabin. It started innocently enough. Rosa had mentioned they needed help setting up computers for a basic skills class, and David offered his expertise. One afternoon of volunteer work turned into 2, then 3, until he was spending every weekday there, from 2 to 6 o'clock. The children had accepted him with the easy trust that kids give to adults who show up consistently. Lily was especially pleased to have him around, proudly introducing him to her friends as the computer man who teaches us cool stuff. David found himself looking forward to these introductions, to being known for something other than his bank account or business. Connections. You're good with them, Rosa said one evening as they cleaned up after the day's activities. The children had gone home, and the center felt peaceful in the soft glow of the new LED lights David had quietly arranged to have installed. They're good kids. Smart, too. Give them the right tools and they could do anything? David was wiping down the computer screens, thinking about how quickly 8-year-old Tommy had picked up basic programming concepts. Rosa watched him work, something gentle in her expression. You know, when you first showed up in town, I thought you'd be gone within a month. City people usually get bored here pretty quickly. I'm not bored. No, I can see that. Question is, what's keeping you here? David stopped cleaning and looked at her directly. The honest answer was standing right in front of him, but he wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. Maybe I needed a place where I could be useful for the right reasons. Their relationship had been deepening gradually, like water soaking into dry earth. Conversations that started about center business would drift into personal territory. David learned that Rosa had moved to Cedar Falls 5 years ago. When her ex-husband abandoned her and Lily, she'd chosen the town because it was far enough from her old life to start fresh, but affordable enough for a single mother with limited options. He promised us the world, Rosa said one evening as they walked through town after locking up the center. Big house, fancy cars, private schools for Lily. Then one day I came home and found a note saying he'd decided family life wasn't for him. I'm sorry, don't be. Took me a while to realize it, but he did us a favor. Lily and I are stronger on our own. We know what we can count on. She glanced at him sideways. What about you? What brought you to our little town? David told her about the divorce, about feeling like his life had been built on shifting sand. 20 years of marriage, and I never really knew who I was when I wasn't trying to impress someone or close a deal. Jennifer saw right through it in the end. Maybe she just wasn't the right person to see the real you. The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility neither was quite ready to explore. But David felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the center's new heating system. Everything changed on a Tuesday in November. Rosa didn't show up for work at the diner, which was unusual enough to worry the other staff. When she missed the afternoon program at the center without calling, David knew something was seriously wrong. He drove to her small apartment above the bakery, finding her pacing the living room while Lily sat quietly on the couch, looking scared. "What's wrong?" David asked immediately. Rosa's face was pale, her hands shaking as she held a piece of paper. "Lily's been having headaches for weeks. I thought it was just stress from school, maybe not getting enough sleep. But they got worse. So I took her to the doctor in the city yesterday." David's stomach dropped. What did they find? "They need to do more tests, but they think it might be a condition that affects blood flow to her brain. It's treatable, but ... Rosa's voice broke. "The treatment costs $30,000. My insurance will cover maybe half if we're lucky." Lily looked up from her coloring book, clearly understanding more than her mother hoped. "Am I going to be okay, Mom?" Rosa knelt beside her daughter, forcing a smile. "Of course you are, sweetheart. We're going to figure this out," but David could see the terror in Rosa's eyes. $30,000 might as well have been $30 million for a single mother working at a small-town diner. Even with insurance, the remaining costs would destroy her financially. That night, David lay awake in his cabin, staring at the ceiling and thinking about an 8-year-old girl who collected butterfly stickers and helped him organize computer cables at the center. Lily, who'd asked him if he was staying long enough to see the first snow, who trusted him enough to share her drawings and her dreams of maybe becoming an artist. Someday. The medical bills were just the beginning. Rosa would have to take time off work for Lily's treatment, losing income when she needed it most. The drive to the city for appointments would strain her old car and eat up money she didn't have. The stress would affect her work performance, possibly costing her the job she desperately needed. David pulled out his laptop and began researching Lily's condition. The treatment had a high success rate when caught early, but timing was crucial. Every week of delay reduced the chances of a complete recovery. Rosa couldn't afford to wait for insurance approvals or payment plans. Lily needed help now. The next morning brought more bad news. Bill found David at the diner, his expression grim. "You heard about the plant closing?" "What plant?" "Mountain Ridge Manufacturing. Only decent-paying employer left in this area. They're shutting down operations next month, moving everything to Mexico. 200 people losing their jobs just before Christmas." David looked around the diner, recognizing several faces that belonged to families who would soon be struggling to survive. The ripple effects would hit every business in town. The diner would lose customers. The community center would lose funding as parents struggled to pay for basic necessities. "Rosa know yet?" David asked. "Probably. Her ex-mother-in-law worked there. Bill shook his head. Timing couldn't be worse with Lily's medical situation. Rosa was hoping to pick up extra shifts to help pay for treatment, but who's going to hire new people when everyone's cutting back? That afternoon, David found Rosa at the center, mechanically helping children with homework while her mind was clearly elsewhere. When the last child left, she finally broke down. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Lily needs that treatment, but I can't afford it. And now, with the plant closing, I might not even be able to keep our apartment. What kind of mother can't provide medical care for her own child?" David wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that money didn't matter, that he could fix all her problems with a single phone call. But he also understood that Rosa was proud, independent, and suspicious of help that seemed too good to be true. She'd already questioned the anonymous heating system donation. A mysterious benefactor solving all her financial problems would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. "You're an amazing mother," he said instead. "Lily is lucky to have you." "Lucky?" Rosa laughed bitterly. "Her mother can't even afford to keep her healthy." That night, David sat at his kitchen table with a pen and paper, writing numbers and making calculations. his remaining assets after the divorce, the cost of Lily's treatment, the community center's ongoing needs. The families about to lose their jobs and their homes outside his window. Snow was falling again, coating the world in deceptive beauty while real people faced impossible choices. David had spent his career solving problems with technology and strategy, but the problems facing Cedar Falls couldn't be fixed with algorithms or business plans. They required something more personal, more costly. They required sacrifice. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning while David was helping Lily with her math homework at the community center. She'd been having more headaches lately, and Rosa was trying to keep her spirits up while waiting for insurance approval that might never come. David stepped outside to take the call, recognizing the number from his old life in Los Angeles. "David, it's Richard from TechFlow Solutions. I have an opportunity that could change your life." Richard had been David's business partner years ago, before they'd gone separate ways to pursue different ventures. They'd remained friendly, but this was the first time Richard had called since David moved to Cedar Falls. "I'm listening," David said, watching through the window as Rosa helped a group of children with an art project using supplies that were clearly running low. Senior Vice President of Innovation, West Coast Operations. Starting salary is $400,000 plus bonuses that could double that. Stock options that'll make you wealthy beyond anything you've seen before. The company's about to go public, and early executives are going to be millionaires several times over. David felt his breath catch. $400,000 was more money than the entire town of Cedar Falls probably saw in a year. It was enough to solve every problem facing every family he'd come to care about. "What's the catch?" David asked. "No. Catch? Well, except you'd need to start next month. Big project launching in January, and they need someone with your expertise to lead the technical team. It's the chance of a lifetime, David, the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a career." Through the window, David watched Lily laugh. At something Rosa had said, her face bright despite the headaches that had been stealing her energy. Rosa looked tired but happy, finding joy in her daughter's smile, even while carrying the weight of impossible medical bills. "I need time to think about it," David said. "Time's the one thing we don't have. They're interviewing candidates this week, making a decision by Friday. I stuck my neck out to get you this interview, but they won't wait. It's now or never." David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would affect not just his future, but the futures of people who'd become more important to him than any job or salary. "Send me the details. I'll get back to you by tomorrow." That evening, David sat in his cabin with the job offer spread across his kitchen table. The numbers were staggering. The benefits package alone was worth more than most people made in several years. Stock options that could make him incredibly wealthy. A chance to return to the world he'd known, to rebuild the financial security he'd lost in the divorce. He pulled out another piece of paper and began writing a different set of numbers. Lily's medical treatment, $30,000. The community center's operating budget for a year, $45,000. Emergency fund for families losing jobs at the plant, at least $50,000. Rosa's car needed major repairs and winter was coming hard. The center needed new computers, art supplies, books for the small library they'd started in the back room. The job in Los Angeles would solve all his personal financial problems, but leave Cedar Falls exactly where it was now, struggling, failing, slowly dying. The people he'd come to love would face their crises alone while he lived in comfort 300 miles away. David walked to his window and looked out at the town below. Lights were coming on in houses where families were probably sitting around kitchen tables, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. Rosa would be helping Lily with homework while worrying about medical bills she couldn't pay. Mrs. Patterson would be planning meals that stretched her pension check until the end of the month. Bill would be wondering if his garage could survive, losing half its customers when the plant closed. His phone rang again. This time it was his ex-wife Jennifer calling from their old house in Los Angeles. "I heard about the job offer," she said without preamble. "Richard called me thinking I might help convince you to take it." "And are you going to try to convince me?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. You know what I'm going to say, David? You're brilliant at what you do. You could be running your own company within 5 years if you take this opportunity. But instead, you're hiding in some mountain town, playing house with people who can't help your career. They're not helping my career, I'm helping them. With what? You've been out of the loop for months. Your skills are getting rusty while you play volunteer at some community center. This job offer might be the last chance you get to return to your real life. What if this is my real life now? Jennifer laughed, but there was no humor in it. Come on, David, you're a city person. You need challenges, competition, the rush of closing big deals. How long can you be satisfied teaching computer skills to farm kids and dating a waitress? The words stung because they touched on fears David had been trying to ignore. Was he running away from his real life or running toward it? Was his love for Rosa genuine, or was he just grateful to feel needed again? After Jennifer hung up, David walked through town in the cold November air. Main Street was mostly dark, but lights still burned in the community center where Rosa was working late, preparing for the next day's activities. Through the window, he could see her organizing craft supplies with the careful precision of someone making limited resources stretch as far as possible. He knocked on the door, and Rosa let him in with a surprised smile. "What are you doing out so late?" "Thinking." David sat down at one of the small tables where he'd been teaching computer skills to children who might not have jobs to look forward to when they grew up. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about leaving? Going somewhere with better opportunities, more resources for Lily?" Rosa considered the question seriously. "I used to. When we first came here, I thought it was temporary, a place to heal and regroup before moving on to something better. But then I realized something." "What's that?" "Better isn't always about more money or bigger opportunities. Sometimes better is about finding a place where you matter, where what you do makes a real difference in people's lives. Lily and I matter here. The kids in this program matter. That's worth more than any fancy job in a big city." David felt something settle in his chest, a certainty he hadn't experienced in months. Even if staying means struggling? Even if you could have an easier life somewhere else? Easier isn't always better either. Rosa sat down across from him. "What's this really about, David?" He told her about the job offer, about the money and opportunities waiting in Los Angeles, about the choice between financial security and staying in Cedar Falls. He didn't mention the specific amounts or how taking the job could solve all their financial problems, but he explained the basic dilemma. Rosa listened without interrupting, her expression growing more thoughtful as he talked. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want the job?" she asked finally. 6 months ago, I would have said yes without thinking twice. It's everything I thought I wanted. And now?" David looked around the community center, at the children's artwork taped to the walls, at the computers where he'd been teaching kids to believe in their own potential. He thought about Lily's laugh, about Rosa's dedication to helping others even when she could barely help herself, about finding purpose in something bigger than profit margins. "Now I'm not sure I want to be that person anymore." David called Richard the next morning and turned down the job offer. The conversation was brief and painful, with Richard questioning his sanity and warning him about burning bridges in the tech industry. When David hung up, he felt simultaneously terrified and relieved, like someone who just jumped off a cliff but was finally flying instead of falling. The real work began that afternoon. David drove to the city to meet with his financial advisor, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd been managing his investments for over a decade. She listened to his plans with growing alarm. "You want to liquidate everything?" Patricia asked, adjusting her glasses. "David, you're talking about your entire retirement fund, your emergency savings, your investment portfolio." "This is money. You've spent 20 years building. I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having some kind of breakdown. First the divorce, then disappearing to this mountain town. Now you want to give away your life savings to people you barely know." David had expected this reaction. To someone like Patricia, who measured success purely in financial terms, his decision looked insane. They're not strangers anymore. They're my community. Community doesn't pay your bills when you're 70 years old. Community doesn't take care of you when you get sick or need long-term care. Money does. What good is money if you don't use it for something that matters? Patricia pulled up his portfolio on her computer screen. You have just over $400,000 in various accounts after the divorce settlement. If you liquidate everything now, after taxes and penalties, you're looking at maybe $320,000 in cash. That's not enough to solve everyone's problems forever. What happens when it runs out? David had done the math repeatedly over the past week. Lily's medical treatment would cost $30,000 after insurance. The community center needed an endowment of at least $50,000 to operate securely. Emergency funds for displaced workers, building repairs, equipment upgrades, scholarships for kids who wanted to attend college but couldn't afford it. The money would stretch further than Patricia imagined, but she was right about one thing. It wouldn't last forever. Then I'll figure something else out. With what skills? You've been out of the job market for months. Technology changes fast. By the time you need to work again, your expertise might be obsolete. David signed the liquidation papers anyway. Patricia shook her head as she processed the transactions, muttering about emotional decisions and financial suicide. David understood her concerns, but he also understood something she didn't, some decisions couldn't be made with spreadsheets and risk assessments. The first anonymous donation appeared in Rosa's mailbox 3 days later. An envelope with $30,000 in cashier's checks and a simple note for Lily's medical treatment from someone who cares. Rosa found David at the diner that afternoon, her hands shaking as she held the envelope. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Who would do something like this?" David kept his expression neutral. "Maybe the same person who paid for the heating system. But this is different. This is personal. Someone knows about Lily's condition. Knows exactly how much we need." Rosa's eyes searched his face. "David, I need you to be honest with me. Do you know who's doing this?" The lie caught in his throat. David had never been good at deception, and Rosa was too smart to be fooled for long. "What matters is that Lily can get the treatment she needs." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now." Rosa stared at him for a long moment, understanding passing between them. "Why won't you let me thank you properly?" "Because this isn't about gratitude, it's about doing what's right." Over the following weeks, more anonymous help appeared throughout the town. The Henderson family, facing eviction after the plant closure, found their rent paid through the end of the year. The community center received a donation large enough to fund operations for 18 months. Mrs. Patterson discovered that her prescription medications had been mysteriously paid for at the pharmacy. David was careful to space out the donations and vary the methods of delivery. Sometimes it was cash in an envelope, sometimes a check from a fictional charitable foundation he'd created, occasionally a direct payment to service providers. He used different banks, different post offices, anything to maintain the illusion that multiple benefactors were helping the town, but Cedar Falls was too small for secrets to last long. People began connecting the timing of the help with David's arrival in town. Bill noticed that David's expensive watch had disappeared, along with his designer clothes and leather shoes. Mrs. Patterson, who had an eye for detail despite her age, observed that David's SUV had been replaced with an older, cheaper model. The whispers started quietly. At first, people spoke in grateful tones about the mysterious benefactor who was saving their community. But as the donations continued and David's own circumstances appeared to decline, the whispers took on different tones. "It's not natural," said Tom Wheeler, who worked at the hardware store. "Man doesn't just give away that kind of money unless something's wrong with him." "Maybe he's trying to buy his way into the community," suggested another longtime resident. "Rich people do that sometimes. They think money can make people like them." "Or maybe he's running from something," added a third voice. "People don't just abandon successful careers to play Santa Claus in small towns." The speculation grew more pointed when people noticed that David had started shopping at the discount grocery store instead of the better market in the next town. His cabin's lights went out earlier each evening, suggesting he was conserving electricity. He began walking to town instead of driving, claiming he enjoyed the exercise, but everyone could see he was cutting expenses. Rosa watched these changes with growing concern and frustration. She knew David was behind the donations, and she knew he was sacrificing his own financial security to help others. But every time she tried to discuss it with him, he deflected her questions or changed the subject. "This has to stop," she told him one evening after the community center's programming had ended. "Whatever you're doing, it's too much. People are starting to talk. Let them talk. They're saying you're either crazy or desperate. Some think you're trying to buy influence in the town. Others think you're some kind of criminal hiding money." David had expected the gossip, but hearing it still stung. "What do you think?" Rosa stepped closer to him, her voice gentle but firm. "I think you're the most generous man I've ever met. And I think you're destroying yourself to help people who might not even appreciate it. Lily's getting better. The families aren't losing their homes. The community center is secure. That's what matters. What about you? What happens when your money runs out and you have nothing left?" David looked around the community center, at the children's artwork on the walls, at the computers where kids were learning skills that might help them build better futures. He thought about Lily's smile when her headaches finally stopped, about families sleeping peacefully in homes they didn't have to worry about losing. "Then I'll have everything that really matters." But even as he said the words, David could see the doubt in Rosa's eyes. She was beginning to question not just his methods, but his motives. And if Rosa couldn't understand why he was doing this, how could he expect anyone else in town to accept his sacrifices? The money was running out faster than he'd anticipated, and the community's needs seemed endless. David was beginning to realize that solving everyone's problems might cost him more than just his savings. It might cost him the very relationships he was trying to protect. Winter had arrived in full force, and David's bank account showed the harsh reality of his choices. $300.47. That was all that remained of 20 years of careful savings and smart investments. He stared at the balance on his laptop screen, the numbers blinking like a warning signal he'd chosen to ignore for months. The cabin felt colder these days, not because the heating was broken, but because David kept the thermostat lower to save money. He'd sold his expensive laptop and replaced it with a basic model that barely ran the freelance projects he'd managed to find. Web design for small businesses, basic database work, anything that could bring in a few $100s to cover rent. And groceries, his old life seemed like a dream now. The business suits hanging in his closet served as expensive reminders of who he used to be. He kept one good outfit for client meetings, but the rest were destined for the donation box. His designer watch was long gone, sold to help fund the community center's new art supplies. The expensive coffee maker had been replaced with a basic pot that made coffee strong enough to fuel long nights of coding. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning while David was working on a website for a bakery 3 towns over. The pay was modest, but it was honest work that helped small businesses stay afloat. He almost didn't answer when he saw Jennifer's number on the screen. "David, what the hell are you doing?" His ex-wife's voice carried across the miles with familiar frustration. "Richard told everyone about the job offer you turned down. $400,000 a year, and you said no. It wasn't right for me, not right. David, you're living like a hermit in the mountains while opportunities pass you by. I heard you're doing freelance work for pocket change. This is insane." David looked out his window at the town below, where people were going about their daily lives in homes they could still afford because of his help. "I'm doing fine. Fine, I talked to Patricia. She said you liquidated everything. Your retirement, your savings, your investment portfolio, 20 years of building wealth, gone. For what? For things that matter." Jennifer's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Things that matter? You mean playing hero to a bunch of strangers who'll forget you the minute you stop paying their bills? Wake up, David. You're not saving anyone. You're just destroying yourself." After she hung up, David sat in silence, her words echoing in his head. The doubt had been growing for weeks, fed by whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, by concerned looks from people who'd once welcomed him warmly. Even Rosa seemed different lately, more distant, as if she was afraid to get too close to someone who might be losing his grip on reality. The breaking point came that afternoon at the diner. David overheard a conversation between two men at the corner booth, voices low but not quite low enough. "I'm telling you, something's not right about him," said Frank, who worked at the post office. "Normal people don't just give away their life. Savings to strangers." "Maybe he's running from something," replied his companion. "Could be money laundering or hiding assets from the IRS. Rich guys do that sometimes. Or maybe he's just crazy. My sister works with mentally ill people, and she says this kind of extreme behavior is a warning sign. Could be dangerous." David felt heat rise in his face but forced himself to finish his coffee calmly. These were people he'd helped, families whose children attended programs his donations had saved. Now they were questioning his sanity and motives. Rosa appeared beside his table, coffee pot in hand but concern in her eyes. "You okay? You look upset." "Just tired." David left money on the table and stood to leave. Long day ahead. That evening brought worse news. David was at the community center helping clean up after the day's activities when Rosa's phone rang. She answered with her usual cheerful greeting, but her expression quickly changed to one of shock and confusion. "Carlos?" she said, and David felt his stomach drop. Carlos was Lily's father, the man who'd abandoned them 3 years ago without a word. Rosa stepped outside to continue the conversation, leaving David alone with his racing thoughts. Through the window, he could see her pacing back and forth, one hand pressed to her forehead in a gesture he'd learned meant she was stressed or overwhelmed. When she came back inside 20 minutes later, her face was pale. "That was Carlos. He's back in the area. Wants to see Lily after 3 years. He says he's changed. Got a good job in Denver, nice apartment, stable life. He wants to make up for lost time." Rosa sank into one of the small chairs, looking fragile in a way David had never seen before. "He's talking about moving here, being part of Lily's life again." David felt something cold settle in his chest. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to slam the door in his face, but another part thinks maybe Lily deserves a chance to know her father. She asks about him sometimes, wonders why he left." Over the next few days, Carlos's presence in town created ripples of gossip and speculation. He was staying at the motel on the highway, driving a new truck and wearing expensive clothes that suggested his claims of success were true. Word spread quickly that he'd taken Rosa to dinner, that he'd spent an afternoon with Lily at the playground, that he was making all the right noises about being a changed man. David watched from a distance, feeling like an outsider in a story he thought he was part of. Carlos was handsome in a way that David had never been, confident and charming with the easy smile of someone who'd always been able to talk his way out of trouble. When he walked down Main Street, people stared with the fascination reserved for celebrities or train wrecks. The real test came on a Saturday afternoon. David was at the community center setting up for a computer class. When Carlos walked in with Lily, the little girl looked excited but nervous, holding her father's hand like she wasn't quite sure he was real. "You must be David," Carlos said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard a lot about you. Rosa says you've been helping out around here." "Just volunteering," David replied, accepting the handshake while studying. The man who'd broken Rosa's heart and abandoned his daughter. "That's generous of you. Though I have to wonder what a successful businessman gets out of teaching computer skills to farm kids." Carlos's tone was friendly, but there was an edge underneath. "Unless you're not as successful as people thought." The comment was delivered with a smile, but David understood the challenge behind it. Carlos had done his research, had heard the whispers about David's declining circumstances. He was testing to see if David would defend himself or admit weakness. "I get a lot out of it," David said simply. "These kids are smart and eager to learn." Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. "David taught me how to make a website. Want to see?" As Lily showed off her basic HTML skills, David noticed how Carlos watched everything with calculating eyes. The older computers, the carefully managed supplies, the donated books and art materials. This was a man who measured value in dollars, and saw David's work as the desperate scrambling of someone who'd lost his way. That evening, David learned that Carlos had made Rosa an offer that would change everything. A chance to move to Denver, where he had a good job and a 3-bedroom apartment. Lily could attend better schools, Rosa could take nursing classes she'd always dreamed about, and they could be a real family again. He's different, Rosa told David as they walked through town after locking up the center. More mature, more responsible. He admitted his mistakes and wants to make up for lost time. Do you believe him? Rosa was quiet for a long moment. I want to. For Lily's sake, I want to believe that people can change, that families can heal. And for your sake, I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of trusting him again, scared of staying here and struggling forever, scared of making the wrong choice. For Lily, David understood that fear, but he also understood something else. Carlos had reappeared just when David's money was running out, just when the whispers about his stability were growing louder. The timing felt calculated, like a predator returning when his prey was weakest. The question wasn't whether Carlos had really changed. The question was whether Rosa would choose security over uncertainty, whether she would trust the man who'd left her or the man who'd sacrificed everything to stay. Winter had arrived in full force, and David's bank account showed the harsh reality of his choices. $300.47. That was all that remained of 20 years of careful savings and smart investments. He stared at the balance on his laptop screen, the numbers blinking like a warning signal he'd chosen to ignore for months. The cabin felt colder these days, not because the heating was broken, but because David kept the thermostat lower to save money. He'd sold his expensive laptop and replaced it with a basic model that barely ran the freelance projects he'd managed to find. Web design for small businesses, basic database work, anything that could bring in a few $100s to cover rent. And groceries, his old life seemed like a dream now. The business suits hanging in his closet served as expensive reminders of who he used to be. He kept one good outfit for client meetings, but the rest were destined for the donation box. His designer watch was long gone, sold to help fund the community center's new art supplies. The expensive coffee maker had been replaced with a basic pot that made coffee strong enough to fuel long nights of coding. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning while David was working on a website for a bakery 3 towns over. The pay was modest, but it was honest work that helped small businesses stay afloat. He almost didn't answer when he saw Jennifer's number on the screen. David, what the hell are you doing? His ex-wife's voice carried across the miles with familiar frustration. Richard told everyone about the job offer you turned down. $400,000 a year, and you said no. It wasn't right for me, not right. David, you're living like a hermit in the mountains while opportunities pass you by. I heard you're doing freelance work for pocket change. This is insane. David looked out his window at the town below, where people were going about their daily lives in homes they could still afford because of his help. I'm doing fine. Fine, I talked to Patricia. She said you liquidated everything. Your retirement, your savings, your investment portfolio, 20 years of building wealth, gone. For what? For things that matter. Jennifer's laugh was sharp and bitter. Things that matter? You mean playing hero to a bunch of strangers who'll forget you the minute you stop paying their bills? Wake up, David. You're not saving anyone. You're just destroying yourself. After she hung up, David sat in silence, her words echoing in his head. The doubt had been growing for weeks, fed by whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, by concerned looks from people who'd once welcomed him warmly. Even Rosa seemed different lately, more distant, as if she was afraid to get too close to someone who might be losing his grip on reality. The breaking point came that afternoon at the diner. David overheard a conversation between 2 men at the corner booth, voices low but not quite low enough. I'm telling you, something's not right about him, said Frank, who worked at the post office. Normal people don't just give away their life. Savings to strangers. Maybe he's running from something, replied his companion. Could be money laundering or hiding assets from the IRS. Rich guys do that sometimes. Or maybe he's just crazy. My sister works with mentally ill people, and she says this kind of extreme behavior is a warning sign. Could be dangerous. David felt heat rise in his face but forced himself to finish his coffee calmly. These were people he'd helped, families whose children attended programs his donations had saved. Now they were questioning his sanity and motives. Rosa appeared beside his table, coffee pot in hand but concern in her eyes. You okay? You look upset? Just tired. David left money on the table and stood to leave. Long day ahead. That evening brought worse news. David was at the community center helping clean up after the day's activities when Rosa's phone rang. She answered with her usual cheerful greeting, but her expression quickly changed to one of shock and confusion. Carlos? She said, and David felt his stomach drop. Carlos was Lily's father, the man who'd abandoned them 3 years ago without a word. Rosa stepped outside to continue the conversation, leaving David alone with his racing thoughts. Through the window, he could see her pacing back and forth, one hand pressed to her forehead in a gesture he'd learned meant she was stressed or overwhelmed. When she came back inside 20 minutes later, her face was pale. That was Carlos. He's back in the area. Wants to see Lily after 3 years? He says he's changed. Got a good job in Denver, nice apartment, stable life. He wants to make up for lost time. Rosa sank into one of the small chairs, looking fragile in a way David had never seen before. He's talking about moving here, being part of Lily's life again. David felt something cold settle in his chest. What do you want to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to slam the door in his face, but another part thinks maybe Lily deserves a chance to know her father. She asks about him sometimes, wonders why he left. Over the next few days, Carlos's presence in town created ripples of gossip and speculation. He was staying at the motel on the highway, driving a new truck and wearing expensive clothes that suggested his claims of success were true. Word spread quickly that he'd taken Rosa to dinner, that he'd spent an afternoon with Lily at the playground, that he was making all the right noises about being a changed man. David watched from a distance, feeling like an outsider in a story he'd thought he was part of. Carlos was handsome in a way that David had never been, confident and charming with the easy smile of someone who'd always been able to talk his way out of trouble. When he walked down Main Street, people stared with the fascination reserved for celebrities or train wrecks. The real test came on a Saturday afternoon. David was at the community center setting up for a computer class. When Carlos walked in with Lily, the little girl looked excited but nervous, holding her father's hand like she wasn't quite sure he was real. You must be David, Carlos said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I've heard a lot about you. Rosa says you've been helping out around here. Just volunteering, David replied, accepting the handshake while studying. The man who'd broken Rosa's heart and abandoned his daughter. That's generous of you. Though I have to wonder what a successful businessman gets out of teaching computer skills to farm kids. Carlos's tone was friendly, but there was an edge underneath. Unless you're not as successful as people thought. The comment was delivered with a smile, but David understood the challenge behind it. Carlos had done his research, had heard the whispers about David's declining circumstances. He was testing to see if David would defend himself or admit weakness. I get a lot out of it, David said simply. These kids are smart and eager to learn. Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. David taught me how to make a website. Want to see? As Lily showed off her basic HTML skills, David noticed how Carlos watched everything with calculating eyes. The older computers, the carefully managed supplies, the donated books and art materials. This was a man who measured value in dollars, and saw David's work as the desperate scrambling of someone who'd lost his way. That evening, David learned that Carlos had made Rosa an offer that would change everything. A chance to move to Denver, where he had a good job and a 3-bedroom apartment. Lily could attend better schools, Rosa could take nursing classes she'd always dreamed about, and they could be a real family again. He's different, Rosa told David as they walked through town after locking up the center. more mature, more responsible. He admitted his mistakes and wants to make up for lost time. Do you believe him? Rosa was quiet for a long moment. I want to. For Lily's sake, I want to believe that people can change, that families can heal. And for your sake, I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of trusting him again, scared of staying here and struggling forever, scared of making the wrong choice. For Lily, David understood that fear, but he also understood something else. Carlos had reappeared just when David's money was running out, just when the whispers about his stability were growing louder. The timing felt calculated, like a predator returning when his prey was weakest. The question wasn't whether Carlos had really changed. The question was whether Rosa would choose security over uncertainty, whether she would trust the man who'd left her or the man who'd sacrificed everything to stay. The town meeting was called for Thursday evening, officially to discuss the community center's budget for the coming year. But everyone knew the real purpose was to address the elephant in the room, David's increasingly obvious financial struggles. And the questions surrounding his mysterious generosity, David almost didn't attend. He sat in his cabin that evening, looking at the notice that had been slipped under his door, debating whether facing the community's judgment would make things better or worse. His checking account showed $83. His latest freelance client had paid late, and the grocery store bill was due tomorrow. For the first time since moving to Cedar Falls, David wondered if Jennifer had been right about him destroying his life for people who would never understand. But at 7:30, he found himself walking into the community center's main room, where about 40 townspeople had gathered. The atmosphere felt tense, charged with unspoken questions and barely contained gossip. David took a seat in the back row, trying to make himself invisible. Bill called the meeting to order in his capacity as Community Center Board President. We're here to talk about the center's future, but I think we all know there are other issues that need addressing. His eyes found David in the crowd. Some of you have expressed concerns about recent events in our town, about people's motives and methods. Tom Wheeler stood up first. I'll say what everyone's thinking. It's not natural for someone to just give away their life savings like that. Normal people don't bankrupt themselves to help strangers. It makes people uncomfortable. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. David felt heat rise in his face but forced himself to remain silent. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand, her voice shaky but determined. Tom Wheeler, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. That man paid for my medications when I couldn't afford them. Your own nephew got help with his family's rent money. How dare you question the motives of someone who's done nothing but help this community? That's exactly the problem, Tom shot back. Nobody helps that much without wanting something in return. What's he really after? Frank from the post office joined in. Could be money laundering. Could be tax evasion. Rich people don't just go broke unless they're hiding something. The accusations flew around the room while David sat in stunned silence. These were people whose children he'd taught, whose problems he'd helped solve, whose community he'd grown to love. Now they were treating him like a criminal or a madman. Then Rosa stood up. The room fell quiet as she walked to the front, her face calm but her eyes blazing with something David had never seen before. She turned to face the crowd, her voice clear and strong. I want to tell you all a story, she began. 3 years ago, my daughter's father walked out on us without warning, left a note saying family life wasn't for him, and disappeared. I came to this town broken, scared, and nearly penniless. I had a sick child, no support system, and barely enough money to survive. She paused, looking around the room at faces that had grown uncomfortable with the direction of her story. You all remember those days. You were kind to us, but kindness doesn't pay medical bills or fix broken heating systems. When Lily needed expensive treatment for her condition, I was facing a choice between my daughter's health and our home. I was 1 month away from having to choose between medicine and rent. David felt his throat tighten as Rosa continued. Then this man showed up in our town. A stranger who had every reason to keep driving, to mind his own business, to worry about his own problems. Instead, he saw a community struggling and decided to help. Not just with money, though, that was part of it. He gave his time, his skills, his energy. He showed up every day to teach our children, to fix what was broken, to make sure nobody fell through the cracks. Rosa's voice grew stronger as she spoke. You want to know his motives? I'll tell you his motives. He fell in love. Not just with me, though. I hope that's part of it. He fell in love with this place, with these people, with the idea that communities can take care of each other. The room was completely silent now. David could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps recognizing their own ingratitude in Rosa's words. David liquidated his entire life savings to help this town, Rosa continued. He turned down a job that would have made him wealthy beyond anything most of us can imagine. He sacrificed his financial security, his professional reputation, his comfortable life in the city, and what has he gotten in return? Suspicion, gossip, accusations that he's either crazy or criminal. Tom Wheeler started to interrupt, but Rosa held up her hand. I'm not finished. Last week, my ex-husband came back. The man who abandoned Lily and me when we needed him most. He's offering us a new life in Denver. Nice apartment, good schools, financial security. Everything I thought I wanted when I first came here. David felt his heart stop. He'd been dreading this moment, knowing it would come, but hoping somehow it wouldn't. Carlos wants me to move to Denver with him and Lily. Start over, be a family again. And you know what? Part of me was tempted, not because I love him, but because I'm tired of struggling. Tired of counting every penny, tired of worrying about the future. Rosa turned to look directly at David, her eyes soft with something that made his chest ache. But then I realized something. Carlos is offering me an easy life, but David has shown me a meaningful one. Carlos disappeared when things got hard, but David stayed when things got impossible. Carlos is asking me to choose security, but David has shown me what loyalty actually looks like. She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising with passion. This man has given everything he had to help people who now question his sanity. He's broke, he's struggling, and he's facing criticism from people he's helped. But he's still here, still showing up at the community center, still helping children learn, still believing in this town even when this town doesn't believe in him. Mrs. Patterson was crying openly now. Several other people looked ashamed, staring at their hands or the floor. So let me be very clear, Rosa said, her voice ringing through the silent room. I'm not moving to Denver. I'm not choosing the easy path or the safe option. I'm staying here with David in this town that he's sacrificed everything to help. Because that's what loyalty looks like. That's what love looks like. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow. Then Bill stood up, his weathered face serious. I owe you an apology, David. We all do. You saved my grandson's family from eviction. And I repaid that kindness with suspicion. That's on me. One by one, people began standing. Frank from the post office admitted that David had helped his elderly mother with her heating bills. The Henderson family talked about how David's anonymous help had kept them from losing their home. Parents spoke about the computer skills their children had learned, the confidence they'd gained, the hope for better futures that David had helped nurture. Tom Wheeler was the last to speak, his voice humble and ashamed. I was wrong. I was scared of change, scared of outsiders, scared of admitting that we needed help. You showed us what generosity really means, and I repaid it with gossip and suspicion. I'm sorry. As the meeting ended, people approached David, one by one, offering handshakes, hugs, and heartfelt apologies. But David barely heard them. His attention was focused on Rosa, who was walking toward him with Lily at her side. You chose to stay, he said quietly. I chose you, Rosa replied. I chose us? I chose this life we've built together, even if it's not easy. Lily hugged David's legs, looking up at him with bright eyes. Are you really going to stay forever? Mom said you might have to leave. David knelt down to her level, his heart full of certainty he hadn't felt in months. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. This is my home now. 6 months later, David and Rosa were married in a simple ceremony at the community center, surrounded by the people whose lives they'd touched and who had, in turn, transformed them. The room was warm, filled with laughter and music from a band of local musicians who donated their time. Children played in corners while adults shared stories and danced to songs that celebrated love, loyalty, and the bonds that make communities into families. David had found work managing IT systems for several small businesses in the region. The pay was modest, but it was enough. More importantly, he discovered that happiness didn't require wealth, just purpose and people who mattered. As he and Rosa danced their first dance as husband and wife, David thought about the journey that had brought him here. He'd lost a fortune but gained a family. He'd sacrificed financial security but found something more valuable, a place where he belonged, people who loved him for who he was rather than what he could provide, and the deep satisfaction of knowing his choices had made the world a little bit better. Outside the community center windows, snow was falling gently, coating the town in the same pristine beauty that had welcomed him almost 2 years ago. But now David wasn't running from anything. He was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by people who had taught him that the greatest wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the loyalty and love of those who choose to stay when staying becomes difficult. Sometimes the best investments are the ones that cost everything but return something priceless: a home, a family, and a life worth living.